the light of the senses and spirit of our ancestors doesn't perish like the grass, but like the stars and moonbeams, they vanish in the radiance of the sun. It's like the naked man who jumped into the water so that he might escape from the hornet's stings. The hornet circled above him, and whenever he put out his head, they would not spare him. The water is recollection of God, and the hornet is the thought. During this time of such and such a woman or man. Hold your breath in the water of remembrance so that you may be freed from old thoughts and temptations. After that, you will assume the nature of that pure water entirely from head to foot. As the noxious hornet flees from the water, so it will be afraid of approaching you. After that, be far from the water if you wish. For in your innermost soul, you are of the same nature as the water. Those persons then who have passed from the world are not non-existent, but are absorbed in the attributes of God. Even as the star disappears in the presence of the sun. The most deepest truths are often best understood through analogies. When you compare something abstract with something familiar, all of a sudden it doesn't seem so abstract anymore. Rumi was no stranger to analogies and would often use them in his poems to convey a very deep spiritual truth. You may have even heard of a few of them, including "The wound is the place where the light enters you," or "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you." On the surface level, a wound or breeze doesn't seem so special, but when we pay extra attention to them, we see that the wound is not just a wound. It is a gateway to spiritual awakening. The breeze is not just the breeze, it is a messenger of love and wisdom. This is why it's so important to read these poems multiple times and on a deeper level, because there is a rich symbolism here that is often missed under the cover of words and poetry. Frankly, I know a lot of people who just flat out give up whenever they come across a poem like this, because it requires them to think, ponder, and contemplate deeply. It's not something like watching TV or spending time with friends. But these poems are not just a form of entertainment. They are also mirrors that reveal our deepest self. Mirrors to our very own soul. And so let's spend some time today to look into this mirror that Rumi is holding up and see if we can learn a thing or two from it. But before we begin, please take a moment to show your interest in this video by dropping a like, posting a comment, or hitting that subscribe button. You know, your support is a big reason for why I'm able to keep producing these videos that can help us grow and awaken. If you aren't already a subscriber, but you enjoy videos like these, then I'd definitely love to have you as part of this growing community of like-hearted souls who crave to grow spiritually. But of course, now that we have that covered, let's take a closer look at this poem, starting with this incredible first line. Rumi begins this analogy of the light of the senses and the spirit of our ancestors not perishing like the grass, but rather vanishing in the radiance of the sun. This is a beautifully poetic line on its own, but what exactly does it mean? Well, light, as we know it, represents knowledge and wisdom. Light, in the most spiritual and metaphorical sense, is the force or power that guides us through life. And we can get this light or wisdom in multiple ways, including perhaps most obviously through our five senses. For example, we can read a book by relying on our sight. We can listen to a spiritual teaching by relying on our hearing. But wisdom is not only found through our own experiences, it can also be found through the experiences of others, particularly those who came before us, in other words, our ancestors. So much knowledge and wisdom gets passed on from generation to generation to generation. In fact, this video is a perfect example of that, as we read and uncover the wisdom of this poem centuries, and I mean centuries, after the death of its writer. Rumi's body may have died long ago, but his spirit and wisdom lives on in each and every one of us. And in this way, our experiential knowledge and ancestral wisdom doesn't just wither and die like grass. It endures from generation to generation. Which is why this light must be honored and cherished, just like we honor and cherish Rumi's poems. But here's the real kicker. As amazing as this wisdom is, it is absolutely nothing when compared to the wisdom of God. It is like stars and moonbeams that shine bright in the darkness of night. However, as soon as morning arrives, every single one of those stars and moonbeams vanish into the radiance of the sun. That is to say, they vanish into the light of God. Now just take a moment to reflect on that, because when you do, you will appreciate just how incredible of a line this is, and infinitely more how incredible God is. We sit here enjoying and learning from Rumi, who is arguably unlike any other soul, but even he is just a star that vanishes into the radiance of God. This is the real light we should be after, because none of us can see the stars during the day. We can't see our senses. We can't see our ancestors. In truth, we can't see anything but God. Or perhaps, the better way to put it, we shouldn't see anything but God. God should be at the very most center of our life, but sadly, that is rarely the case. If we all remembered God all the time, perhaps there would never even be a Rumi to help us remember him. But fortunately, there is a Rumi, and I'm not just talking about the mystic and poet who lived 700 years ago. Inside all of us, there lives a Rumi. There lives a Christ. There lives a Buddha. We all have the potential to connect with God, but it requires transcending this world. And that is what the rest of this poem is all about. Now, Rumi doesn't get back to this analogy of the stars and the sun until the end of the poem. But until then, we actually encounter another analogy that is just as powerful and just as beautiful. Here, Rumi introduces the metaphor of a naked man jumping into water to escape from hornets. Now, I admit, this might seem like a funny image, and I'm certainly not denying the comedy of it. Interestingly enough, Rumi was actually known to use a lot of humor and wit in his poetry, and many of his poems often have this playful and lighthearted tone, even as they simultaneously explore deep spiritual themes and insights. And this metaphor of the man and the hornets is no different. Because although it's kind of funny to imagine this naked guy running around trying to avoid the sting of these hornets, there's also a very deep and profound message here. The naked man is the soul who is leaving this world. Not necessarily physically, but more so spiritually. They are leaving behind all the distractions and illusions that have prevented them from leading a spiritual life. In fact, nakedness often means being vulnerable, authentic, humble, and willing to be seen as one truly is without any masks or pretenses. If you look at various spiritual traditions, nakedness is actually associated with the idea of shedding worldly attachments and distractions in order to focus on one's inner self and connection with God. It's actually no surprise that every single one of us enters this world naked, and there is no one more pure than a baby that has just been born. But this naked man is not just taking off his clothes and relaxing out under the sun. He is being chased after by dangerous or noxious hornets that want to hurt him. These hornets are like our thoughts and distractions that plague us in our everyday lives and hinder our spiritual growth. They circle above us and never let us go except when we are in the safety of water. Now, Rumi clearly states what water represents here. It is the recollection or remembrance of God. When we remember God, we enter a special state that protects us from all the thoughts and distractions of this world. Think about the last time you had a deep prayer or meditation. The last time you enjoyed a poem like this, or being in nature. You forgot about everything because you were in the complete presence of God. And this is what the naked man feels like when he is fully submerged in the water. But while many of us might experience spiritual moments from time to time, there are actually far fewer of us who will actually live this spiritual life of devotion. We might all enjoy spiritual activities for a while, but then we get pulled back into the thoughts and distractions of this world. To go to the analogy, we're like the naked man who sticks his head out again after a few minutes, hoping that the hornets are gone, but only getting stung again by them and experiencing very painful wounds. Rumi is conveying a very deep lesson here. In order to truly escape the hornets, in order to truly escape the thoughts and distractions of this world, you must hold on to the water of remembrance and allow it to cleanse you of old thoughts and temptations so that you can become pure again, like the water itself. Now, what a beautiful metaphor that is. Because the truth is that we all get distracted from time to time. That is just the simple nature of being human. But how many of us turn back to God after we have become distracted? How many of us actually hold our breath underwater until we actually become the water? Because through enough practice and purification, the hornets will eventually leave and find a new victim. If your ego or thoughts no longer have control over you, they will just simply move on to the next person who is still anchored in this world. The truth is, one cannot destroy distractions or thoughts, but they can definitely transcend them. And that is the spirit of the message here. By immersing ourselves in the remembrance of God, we can finally become purified and free from all the different distractions that plague us. Even when we return back to society and back to normal life, we are protected from these distractions because we become so pure that eventually water is our essence. We don't always have to be physically submerged in the water. And this is a critical point here. In other words, we don't have to be praying or meditating or fasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is physically impossible. We all have daily necessities that many would not consider to be a part of our spiritual life, but essential nonetheless. And so, when you take the time to truly purify yourself, the purified you will always remain pure, even if you are far away from the water of remembrance. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the story of Buddha, just to use a very famous and well-known example. According to Buddhist accounts, it took 6 years for Siddhartha, or eventually the Buddha, to awaken. He started out with asceticism and self-denial before choosing moderation and eventually deep meditation and contemplation. But when he finally achieved awakening underneath that famous Bodhi tree, he didn't just stay there for the rest of his life. Rather, he traveled. He traveled and traveled, spending the rest of his life teaching others the path of liberation from suffering. And even though he returned back to society and could have arguably been influenced to return back to his old ways, he remained pure through and through because his essence was pure water. The naked man becomes so pure that once he leaves the water, no hornet can actually ever hurt him again. And this is actually a great segue to the final stanza of the poem. Because those beautiful souls who have left this world, like Buddha, like Rumi, are not non-existents. They still live in each and every one of us, and more importantly, they live in the attributes of God. They become absorbed into the attributes of God. And they didn't have to wait until their physical death to be absorbed. In fact, I personally believe they became absorbed much, much more earlier than that. Just like we can all be absorbed in our current life through enough spiritual purification. It's important to note here, absorb doesn't mean we just vanish and become nothing, as if we never existed before. Rather, it means that we become a part of something so much bigger than us. We see our lives as much more than just us. We merge and connect with God so that we don't see ourselves anymore, but rather see ourselves as part of the universal God. Just like when it is daytime, we no longer see the stars, we can only see the sun. We can only see God. So I hope you enjoyed this beautiful poem, the incredibly rich imagery, symbolism, and wisdom it has to offer, even after all these years. As I've said before, poems are so much more than poems. Each one of them is like a spiritual text that deserves your time, care, and attention. We are so blessed that we have these teachings available to us, and even more blessed that we have God available to us. So step into His water and let yourself become pure. For as much as you might admire the star that you are, you will be left in sheer awe when you discover the presence of the sun.